The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild took me 3 years to complete. This wasn't because my game time was 26,280 hours, it wasn't because I kept restarting over and over, no. I believe it was down to 2 reasons. One, and probably the reason which will make most of you click off this video straight away, I hadn't played any other Zelda games before, except for a little dabble in Twilight Princess. And 2, the 2 core, overarching gameplay loops which revolve around the core game goals in Breath of the Wild are at odds with one another. These gameplay loops are the shrines and the divine beasts. They don't clash in the natural sense. They don't break AI, make you click through walls, or clear your inventory. But they clash in terms of what appeals to the target demographic. To figure out Breath of the Wild's target demographic, we will take a look at Bartle's player types. Bartle's player types doesn't focus on gender, age, background, but instead it focuses on what really matters, the types of players the game is designed for. Bartle says that there are 4 types of players: killers, socializers, explorers, and achievers. This diagram isn't just to force players into specific boxes that trap them into what they can play, but more so it's a guideline that suggests to you as the designer what type of player your game will appeal to. Now of course, as Breath of the Wild could be considered a sandbox game, with its robust physics system and its endless things to do, I think most will agree that the game can be easily pigeonholed into an exploration game. So, let's say that the game is initially for explorers. Explorers are people that love to dive into big, but more importantly, deep worlds with lots of things to find and lots of things to do. Every corner is almost like a lottery. There could be a chance that just around it, there is something interesting to play with. However, if we take another look at the diagram, you can see that there are these words between the types of players. This is because Bartle's player types is also used to group 2 types of players together to then give you as a designer a core aspect of your game to focus on. Now, this is where we get into the core issues of Breath of the Wild's gameplay loops. I believe, and I'm sure most of you would agree with me, that the secondary player type for Breath of the Wild is achievers. Even for other Zelda games, I believe that this would be the case, but especially for Breath of the Wild. I talked about this in depth on my last video for Breath of the Wild, but I will reiterate. The whole game is designed around exploratory loops. Finding watchtowers, which allows you to find shrines. Shrines are intrinsic to the fibers of what makes Breath of the Wild work. Without it, the world would feel empty despite all its treasures and Easter eggs, and explorers, one of the core target audience, would feel its effects the most. What fulfills achievers, according to Bartle, is completing tasks and subtasks within the game. These are what the shrines are. As we're talking about achievers, I think it would be a good idea to break down Breath of the Wild's game goal, tasks, and subtasks. The game goal is to achieve an ultimate change in the game state which is meaningful by design, which in Breath of the Wild's context is destroying Ganon and saving Zelda. The task is transformations of the game state that give the player feedback that they are progressing towards the game goal. These are the shrines and the divine beasts, but for different reasons. The shrines are to get enough hearts to get the Master Sword, and the divine beasts are required to damage Ganon at the beginning of the fight. The subtasks are what the player does towards completing those tasks, so what you do in the shrines and the divine beasts to conquer them. Now that we know what the game goal, tasks and subtasks are, let me explain the 2 points that I made at the start of the video. The shrine gameplay loop and the divine beast gameplay loop are at odds with one another, and I think that is partly because of the lack of design towards the target audience. Like I said, the words in between the 2 types of players are what the designers should be theoretically focused on when making the game to be most appealing to that target audience. but both the shrines and the divine beasts are so disconnected from the world that it creates a big problem for a lot of the players that love Zelda games. Both shrines and divine beasts have one big issue. They are tiny and usually sparse with anything interesting outside of the occasional hidden chest, so they don't appeal to explorers nearly as much as the rest of the game. However, where they differ is how long they take to resolve. Achievers, again, according to Bartle, are satisfied and fulfilled when they achieve something, when they complete a task which aids the progression towards the ultimate change in the game state, the game goal. Shrines are completed usually within 5 to 10 minutes, with quite a few being resolved quicker than that in my experience anyway. That entire gameplay loop of barrier to completion, whether that be combat, knowledge, or exploration, to overcoming that barrier and completing the loop, is resolved very, very quickly, almost like a mobile game, which means that players can get back to what they enjoy doing most, exploring, and write off that dopamine-filled experience of achieving a meaningful task towards progression of the game goal. Whilst with Divine Beasts, from my experience anyway, with the introduction of completely new systems as well as forcing the player into combat when they could have, like me, happily avoided it the whole game, could take them hours. The combat would oftentimes feel very cobbled together. It would use really interesting physics systems, like the wind or the lightning for example, to be used in combat, but they would often have to be worked out in the middle of the fight, and depending on how well prepared you are, it could become really frustrating for a player that doesn't want to do combat in the first place. As again, this game is not designed towards killers. So if we take a look back at the diagram once more, the Divine Beasts now don't really appeal to either explorers or achievers, which explains most people's disdain towards them. Like I said at the beginning of the video, it took me 3 years to complete Breath of the Wild. This is because I took a year break in the middle of both the third and the fourth of the Divine Beasts, just because of how much they didn't appeal to me. Whilst on the other hand, I happily spent 40 hours uninterrupted in the span of a few weeks completing shrines and exploring the world. Let's not forget, Breath of the Wild is still a fantastic game, and in my top 5 for greatest games of all time, which is why I prefaced the video by saying that this was my first Zelda game. I understand that many veterans of the series didn't like both the Divine Beasts or the shrines, because it missed the classic dungeon experience, which makes me think that I didn't like the Divine Beasts as much because of that introduction to the shrines being my first experience of a puzzle in a Zelda game. Hopefully one day I can come back with another video on a certain Zelda game I am playing at the moment and see if my mind changes on that one. Maybe to the point where I want to challenge Bartle's player types and what he found. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. As of now, my Kickstarter for a board game I have been working on for 2 years, Block is a Stacking game, is in its final hours on Kickstarter and is fully funded. So if you want to support me and get a great game for your troubles, click on the link in the description. Thanks and goodbye.